I looked at my sister waiting for her to defend me, but she stayed silent. That night they didn't just remove me from the wedding. They erased me from the family. Stay with me because this story will show you what happens when the loyal daughter finally walks away. I was 8 years old the first time I heard the phrase, "You're the responsible one." My mom Diane said it as she placed her hand on my shoulder in front of our church friends. Emily had spilled punch all over her white dress and burst into tears. I was the one who ran to get paper towels. The one who quietly cleaned it up while mom cooed and comforted her poor, sweet girl. From that moment on, being responsible became my role, unassigned, unofficial, and utterly inescapable. I was Claire Bennett, the big sister, the fixer, the level-headed one. And over time that role became armor. And sometimes a cage. Emily, 3 years younger and a ball of sunshine, was the daughter our mother adored. She had golden curls, a laugh that made strangers smile, and a way of lighting up any room. "She's our little artist," Mom would brag. Claire's more of the practical type. That phrase, the practical type, was used so often I began to hear it as a gentle dismissal, a justification for why Emily got praise and indulgence while I got responsibilities and expectations. Still, I loved my sister. We weren't rivals. We were allies. We shared bunk beds, late-night secrets, and whispered dreams of the future. When Emily cried about being teased at school, I wrote her little affirmations and tucked them in her backpack. When she broke up with her first boyfriend, I took her out for pancakes and swore he was a fool. When our parents' arguments got too loud, I played music through our shared headphones and braided her hair to keep her calm. In college, our paths diverged, me into interior architecture, Emily into art and design, but I still found ways to support her. Our parents, especially Mom, were enthusiastic about Emily's creative pursuits but less helpful when it came to funding them. While I juggled coursework and internships, I also picked up extra freelance projects to send her money when tuition deadlines loomed or rent was late. I did it without expectation, without ever asking for anything back. That's just what older sisters do. Right. By the time we both settled into our post-college lives, me in Seattle, working for a boutique design firm, Emily freelancing and selling paintings online from Portland, our bond remained strong. We didn't talk every day, but when we did, it was easy, familiar, natural. So when Emily called me one cold Tuesday morning in December, her voice shaking with joy, I picked up on the first ring. "He proposed," she squealed. "Claire, I'm getting married." The words hit me like sunlight after a storm. I felt a rush of emotion, pure, uncomplicated happiness for her. "Leo asked you," I said, already smiling. "That's amazing. Oh my God, Em. You have to be my maid of honor," she blurted before I could say anything more. "Please, I can't do this without you." I laughed. "Of course I will. I already have 5 Pinterest boards waiting." We both giggled like we were teenagers again. The distance between us collapsed in that moment. I imagined the dresses, the venues, scouting the color palettes we'd build together. I envisioned being by her side through all of it, helping her shape the wedding of her dreams. Emily had found her person, Leo, a soft-spoken photographer with a kind heart and a steady demeanor that grounded her. They met at an indie gallery show nearly 2 years earlier, and I liked him instantly. He was quiet but thoughtful. The way he looked at her reminded me of how Dad used to look at Mom before the years wore them down. After Emily's call, I cleared the weekend on my calendar and drove to Portland to celebrate. She greeted me with a tackle hug, already glowing with bride-to-be energy. Leo joined us for a dinner filled with stories about how he proposed on the rooftop of their apartment building under a canopy of string lights and handmade lanterns. It was so perfectly her that I got misty-eyed. That weekend, we stayed up late, eating ice cream, flipping through wedding magazines, and making lists. Emily wanted something elegant but relaxed. Soft colors, vintage accents, lots of greenery. "I want it to feel like a garden party that just happens to have a ceremony in the middle," she said. "I can work with that," I grinned. I took notes. I saved photos. I drafted budgets. My phone became a dedicated planning hub filled with tabs for florists, venues, dress shops, and catering options. Emily was open to ideas but kept saying, "Whatever you think, Claire, you're so good at this," and I was. I'd managed 6-figure design projects. I'd coordinated home renovations with impossible deadlines. Compared to that, planning a wedding was a joy, a beautiful emotional puzzle I could solve for someone I loved. Mom, of course, was thrilled about the engagement. She called Emily 5 times that first week alone. But when I spoke to her, she sounded cool. Not unkind, but distant. "Oh, Claire. I suppose you'll have everything under control," she said, in a tone that wasn't quite complimentary. She sent me a list of her friends' daughters who recently got married along with their wedding vendors. "They did lovely jobs," she said. "Might help steer Emily in a more refined direction." I brushed it off. I knew her style wasn't ours. Emily and I had a vision, and I was too focused on making it come true to worry about minor interruptions. Besides, for the first time in a long time, I felt seen, valued, needed. Emily was counting on me, and I was ready to give her everything. The shift was subtle at first, so slight I barely noticed it. A skipped reply here, a vague comment there. It wasn't enough to raise alarms. Just enough to leave me slightly off balance. Mom's been really involved, Emily mentioned one afternoon over the phone. I was in the middle of drafting an email to a florist we'd loved, one whose moody blooms had matched the soft vintage palette Emily described. She already put down a deposit at that new hotel downtown, Emily added almost too casually. The Hawthorne House. I froze, phone pressed between my cheek and shoulder. Wait, I thought we were still narrowing down venues. I know, but she said it was a cancellation spot and we'd be crazy not to grab it. They only had one summer date left. I opened my mouth, then closed it. The Hawthorne House wasn't even on our list. It was sleek and ultra-modern, glass walls and chrome details, not at all the romantic garden-style setting we'd envisioned. But Emily sounded pleased, if slightly overwhelmed. She said she'd cover the venue cost, so I didn't want to make it a thing. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Of course, I said. If it makes things easier. That became the new mantra, if it makes things easier. Over the next few weeks, the wedding planning began to morph, mutating from our collaborative vision into something far more curated by Diane, the florist I'd loved. Replaced by a close friend of your mom's who's done several country club weddings. The muted sage and mauve color palette we'd labored over declared washed out and depressing. Diane preferred bold jewel tones and had already ordered swatches. Each time I raised a quiet concern, Emily brushed it off. She's excited, Claire. And honestly, she's covering a lot of costs now. It takes the pressure off. I said nothing. I didn't remind her that I'd already paid the deposit for the photographer she adored, the one Diane had scoffed at as overrated Instagram bait. I didn't mention the custom welcome boxes I'd begun curating for out-of-town guests or the honeymoon plans I was secretly finalizing. Instead, I smiled. I nodded. I swallowed the small lump growing in my throat. I told myself it was just the natural stress of wedding planning, that it would pass. But something had shifted in the texture of our relationship. Where there had once been ease, there was now static. Our calls grew shorter. The planning documents we'd shared became less collaborative, more passive. Sometimes my edits were overwritten entirely, never acknowledged. And then came Ava. She was our cousin technically, but had always felt more like a satellite to our family than a fixture. She floated in and out of holidays, always aligning herself with whoever had the most influence in the room. Growing up, she mimicked Emily's style and echoed my answers in class. Mom called her eager. I called her calculating. So when I opened Instagram one evening and saw a photo of Emily and Ava laughing at a cake tasting, I blinked in confusion. My name was tagged in the caption, but only as an afterthought. The cake tasting wasn't on my calendar. No one had mentioned it. I clicked through the carousel, Ava holding swatches against bridesmaid dresses. Ava peering at calligraphy samples. Ava in the backseat with Emily holding a half-finished mock-up of the wedding program. I stared at the images, the knot in my chest tightening. The next morning, I brought it up to Emily. That looked fun, I said carefully. Did you end up going with the lemon elderflower? She hesitated. Oh, yeah, it was good. Ava happened to be free and Mom thought it would be helpful to get a second opinion. You could have called me. I didn't want to bother you. You've been so busy with work lately. I had been busy. But I wasn't too busy. Not for her. Never for her. Right, I said, managing a small smile. Well, I'm glad it went well. But the silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. The next hit came not from Emily but from someone entirely unrelated, one of my colleagues, Natalie. We were chatting during our office's weekly coffee break when she leaned in conspiratorially. So, did Emily find the dress yesterday? I blinked. Sorry. The bridal boutique Moments in Lace. My friend works there. She said your sister had an appointment yesterday and left with the one. I felt my fingers curl around my coffee cup a little too tightly. I wasn't there, I said quietly. Oh, Natalie said, clearly uncomfortable. I assumed you're the maid of honor, right? Yeah, I said, then excused myself to the restroom before I could cry at the office. I sat in the stall, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Emily and I had spent our teen years dressing up in pillowcases as veils. We'd made a pact at 14 to never go wedding dress shopping without the other, and now it had happened without me. Not even a text. Not even a photo. That night I called Emily. How was dress shopping? There was a pause. Oh, it kind of just happened. Mom had an appointment and Ava was around, so we went. It wasn't supposed to be a big thing. I would have made time, Em. I know. I'm sorry. It just sort of came together. Another pause. I waited, but she didn't say more. There were so many things I could have said. Why didn't you call me? Do you still want me as your maid of honor? Am I being pushed out? But I said none of them. I didn't trust my voice not to shake. Instead, I said, well, I'm glad you found something you love. She exhaled, relieved. Thanks, Claire. We hung up a few minutes later, and I sat alone in my apartment, the walls suddenly too quiet. For the first time, I let the truth settle in. I was being erased. Not loudly, not cruelly, but deliberately. And by people I loved. I didn't stop helping. Even after being left out of venue tours, floral trials, dress shopping, and cake tastings, somehow I still believed there was a seat for me at the table. Maybe not at the head, but near enough to feel like I mattered. So I kept giving. The photographer deposit, $2,400, had been one of the first gifts I contributed. Emily had fallen in love with his style at a gallery exhibit. He shot weddings with the eye of a storyteller, framing each moment like a memory mid-bloom. Diane scoffed at the price and offered to hire someone who wouldn't charge, like he was shooting for Vogue, but I paid the deposit, quietly sending Emily the receipt with a smiley face emoji and the message booked. He's yours. There was no thank you call, just a thumbs-up reaction to the text. I told myself it didn't matter, that the point was to make her happy, not be praised for it. Next came the stationery, custom-designed invitations with embossed lettering and deckled edges, each one individually hand-tied with silk ribbon in the original soft mauve we'd once chosen before Diane declared it too. Funeral. The artist was a former client of mine who gave me a discount I didn't ask for. When I sent the finished proofs to Emily, she replied 2 days later. They're beautiful, but Mom's already placed an order. Didn't she tell you number? She hadn't. I donated the invitation sets to a local community center that hosted small weddings for underserved couples. The woman who accepted them cried. At least someone appreciated them. Still, I pressed on. I started assembling personalized welcome baskets for out-of-town guests, mini bottles of Oregon wine, artisanal chocolates, lavender soaps, handmade candles. I paid extra for calligraphy name tags matching the typography I remembered Emily once loving. I spent quiet nights arranging each one like a sacred ritual, imagining how her guests would feel arriving to such warmth and care. Each detail, each gift felt like a whisper to Emily, a gentle reminder that I still knew her. Still loved her. Still saw her even if I was fading from her view. The biggest gift, though, was the one I hadn't told anyone about. The honeymoon. It had started as a simple idea, an impulse one night while I was browsing travel blogs to distract myself from the ache. I remembered Emily once saying she wanted to visit the Pacific coast of Mexico, somewhere with wildflowers and waves. She dreamed of a quiet villa, warm breezes, no itinerary, just love and stillness. I founded a cliffside estate in Sayulita with a private pool chef-prepared meals, and an open-air bedroom with white linen canopies that blew like sails in the ocean breeze. I booked it for a week, added first-class flights, and arranged for a series of custom experiences: sunset sails, a local cooking class, a waterfall hike. Total cost $8,700. I didn't flinch. It was a gift. Not for recognition, but redemption for all the parts of the wedding I'd lost. I wanted to give them something they would never forget. I planned to surprise her at the rehearsal dinner to present the itinerary in a hand-painted box with a note that read, "Because no matter what, I'll always want your happiness more than anything else." I never asked myself why I kept giving. Maybe because stopping would have meant admitting the truth that I was no longer included. That my role had shifted from sister to stranger. From center to shadow. And so I kept reaching for scraps of connection, hoping they might lead me back. But the responses grew shorter. The calls more infrequent. When I tried to talk about bridal shower ideas, Emily told me mom's already got that covered. When I offered to help with the seating chart, she replied Ava's been working on it with her. When I asked if we could do a girls' night to relax amid the chaos, she said, "Honestly, I'm just so busy right now." Each reply chipped at something inside me. I started to dread opening our shared planning documents. Most had been emptied, rewritten, or locked. I watched Instagram stories where I appeared only once, blurry in the background or not at all. I RSVP'd yes to every wedding event I was invited to, even as I wondered if I'd soon be left off a list entirely. It was strange how someone could be your favorite person for 3 decades and then gradually begin treating you like a guest in their life. Stranger still was how easy it became to pretend it didn't hurt. I told Mark, my boyfriend of 4 years, only parts of what was happening. The logistical parts. The cancelled vendors, the changed colors, the surprise hotel booking. He listened, concerned but not quite comprehending the full weight. "You've done so much for them," he said one evening as we lay on the couch. "I don't understand how they could push you out like this." "Maybe I'm imagining it," I whispered. "You're not. But what if they don't even realize what they're doing? Maybe they just think, I'm fine, that I don't need to be included." Mark looked at me gently, like someone watching someone else unravel in slow motion. "Claire, you shouldn't have to fight to stay in your sister's life." His words lingered longer than I expected. That night I sat on the edge of our bed staring at the half-packed wedding gift box. The travel documents were neatly organized. The calligraphy envelope rested atop the itinerary. I thought of Emily's face when I would give it to her. Would it light up with gratitude, or would she look confused, wondering why I had gone so far for a wedding she no longer seemed to want me part of? A heavier thought followed one. I tried to push away, but couldn't. Would she even want me at all? I glanced around my apartment, filled with baskets, ribbons, receipts, swatches, and felt an unfamiliar chill. It wasn't just that I was being excluded. It was that no one was bothering to explain why. The message came on a Wednesday afternoon 2 weeks before the wedding. From Emily, "Can you come to Mom and Dad's tomorrow at 7? We should talk. It'll help clear the air before the big day." It was the first time in weeks she'd reached out without prompting. My heart jumped with hope, a fragile kind of hope that maybe this was the moment. Maybe she finally saw how far apart we'd drifted. Maybe she wanted to fix it to bring us back to where we began. I spent hours rehearsing what I would say. Not accusations, just honesty. I wanted to tell her how invisible I'd felt. How I'd still shown up, still given, still loved her. How much it had hurt to be left out and replaced by someone who barely knew her. I reminded myself to stay calm. To listen. To believe that our bond could survive this distance, if only we both reached across it. When I arrived at our parents' house the next evening, I noticed the porch light was already on, casting a soft yellow halo across the steps. For a moment, it looked like home. I rang the doorbell. Mom opened it almost immediately. Her face was unreadable, composed lips pressed into a thin line. "They're in the living room," she said, already turning away. I stepped inside, my palms damp. Dad sat in his usual recliner, looking vaguely uncomfortable, as though he'd wandered into a meeting he wasn't sure he was supposed to attend. Emily perched on the far end of the couch, back straight, eyes low. Ava sat beside her. I blinked. Why was Ava here? I remained standing. No one offered a seat. What's going on? I asked, looking at Emily. I thought this was between us. Emily opened her mouth to speak, but Mom raised a hand, cutting her off. There are some things we need to discuss, Claire, she said with a tight, deliberate tone. As a family. Something shifted in my chest, something cold. Mom stepped forward, her heels clicking across the hardwood. We've been talking, she said. And we've come to a difficult but necessary decision. I looked between them. We, Mom nodded. Emily, Ava, and myself. I turned to Emily again. Her eyes met mine, but only for a second before flicking away. What decision? I asked, though a sick part of me already knew. That your involvement in the wedding has become problematic, Mom said, ticking off invisible boxes on her fingers. You've been overbearing, emotionally manipulative, and frankly exhausting to deal with. My breath caught. What I said softly. Emily shifted, hands twisting in her lap. I've tried. Mom continued, to include you. But you've made things about your contributions, your opinions, your control. You've undermined Emily at every turn. That's not true, I whispered. I looked at my sister, pleading. Emily, please. She finally looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. It's just been a lot, Claire. You always mean well, but it's like every decision gets second-guessed. It's exhausting. And Mom thinks I interrupted, trying to keep my voice steady. What do you think? Emily flinched. I think we need peace at the wedding. And this dynamic isn't peaceful. I stepped back like her words had physically struck me. So what are you saying? I asked. Mom folded her arms, smugness creeping into her voice. We're saying you're not invited, Claire, not to the rehearsal dinner. Not to the ceremony. Not as maid of honor. Not as a guest. My world tilted. What? I breathed. We need a drama-free day, Ava chimed in, for the first time, her tone falsely sweet. It's about Emily, not you. I laughed, a sharp, broken sound. I have done nothing but support her, I said, voice rising. Financially, emotionally, silently when I should have spoken. I've let myself be pushed out again, and now you're telling me I'm the problem. Exactly, Mom said, as if I'd just proven her point. You use your support as leverage. You act like it earns you control. No, I said, shaking my head. I gave out of love, out of loyalty. And you took everything. Dad opened his mouth, then closed it. He stared at the floor, hands folded uselessly in his lap. I turned to him. Dad. He looked up, face pale. Let's not escalate this. That hurt worse than anything. And Emily, my sister, my partner in childhood, my confidant, just sat there silent. I see, I said, after a long moment. I felt strangely calm, like a still lake before a storm. When did you decide this? A few weeks ago, Mom replied, almost proudly. But we didn't want to upset you before it became necessary. So, Ava's the new maid of honor? I asked, turning toward her. She didn't deny it. I nodded. No one moved. No one tried to stop me as I stepped toward the front door. Good to know, I said, reaching for the handle. Claire, Emily said suddenly, her voice quiet. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. I turned back to her, tears burning but unshed. You already did, I said. Then I opened the door and walked out. The air outside was thick with June heat, but I felt cold. I made it to my car before the first tear fell. Then another, then a flood. I sat behind the wheel, headlights off, hands gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. My phone buzzed once. A text from Mark. You okay? I wasn't. But I didn't reply. I drove through familiar streets that now felt foreign, blurry with grief, slick with betrayal. And for the first time in my adult life, I realized something bone deep: I could give, and it would never be enough for people who only saw my usefulness, not my worth. They didn't just leave me out of the wedding. They erased me from the narrative. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake on the couch, fully clothed, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly overhead, like the pieces of my life coming undone. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that living room. The expression on Mom's face controlled satisfaction. Ava's smug silence. Emily saying nothing, doing nothing, as I was exiled from her wedding like some distant acquaintance who had overstepped. By 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep entirely and sat at my kitchen table with a cup of untouched tea, a legal pad, and a pen. I began to write. Not to vent. Not to craft a letter. I made a list. What I've given to this wedding: photographer deposit $2 400 slash, custom invitations, unused $1 100. Welcome. Baskets assembled not distributed $850. String quartet booking for ceremony $1,300. Calligraphy artist for name cards $250. Vintage hairpin to match our grandmother's earrings $175. Honeymoon flights $4 200. Private villa and experiences $4 500. Total $14 775. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't just the money, it was the time, the energy, the emotional bandwidth I'd poured into it all. Into them. And they had erased me without hesitation. By 7 a.m. I was showered, dressed, and ready. I didn't feel strong, but I felt awake. And that was enough. I opened my laptop and began the process of reclaiming myself. First, I logged into the travel portal and canceled the honeymoon, the flights, the villa, the sunset cruise, the cooking class. I wrote a polite but firm email to the travel coordinator explaining that the gift had been rescinded. Then I called the resort directly confirming that the refund would be processed back to my card. The receptionist sounded disappointed. It was such a beautiful booking, she said. It was, I replied. Just not for the right people anymore. Next, I opened my banking app and moved the $8 700 back into my savings account. Then I placed one last call to my credit card company. I need to report unauthorized charges, I said. Wedding expenses made without my consent. Family members using my information. I paused. Yes. I'm sure. It felt oddly cathartic. Like drawing a firm line through someone else's pencil sketch of your life. Around noon, I met Olivia for lunch. She took one look at me and didn't even wait for a greeting. What did they do? I told her everything. From the whispered betrayals to the staged intervention. The banishment, the silence, the tears. By the time I finished, Olivia's expression had shifted from concern to fury. You're not crazy, she said, reaching for my hand. They've been building this narrative for a while. What do you mean? She exhaled. I didn't tell you before because I thought it would blow over. I didn't want to hurt you more. But Claire, your mom's been talking about you behind your back for months. My stomach dropped. At Emily's engagement party, she told my mom you were struggling emotionally, that you were bitter about being single and projecting it onto the wedding. At the gallery fundraiser, she joked that you might try to upstage the bride, and at the brunch last month, she said you had boundary issues, and that Emily was learning to put herself first. I stared at her speechless. I thought it was just Diane being Diane. Olivia said softly. But now, I see the pattern. She's been laying the groundwork. Poisoning people against you. I pressed my hand to my mouth. It wasn't just that I'd been excluded, I'd been framed. She never liked that I had independence, I murmured. That I didn't need her approval. And when Emily and I were close, it made her invisible. Olivia nodded. And she doesn't know how to tolerate being irrelevant. The words hung in the air like smoke. Acrid, undeniable. That evening I sat on my balcony with a blanket wrapped around me watching the Seattle skyline flicker against the dusky sky. The ache in my chest hadn't gone. But it had changed shape. It was no longer just sadness. It was a kind of grief for the family I thought I had. For the sister I'd believed would always be my person. I knew I couldn't untangle it alone. The next morning I made an appointment with a therapist. Her name was Rachel, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and an office filled with soft, warm lighting and bookshelves that smelled faintly of cedar. In our first session, I told her about the wedding, the betrayal, the silences. I cried more than I expected. She listened patiently, then asked me a single question that changed everything. Claire, she said gently, when did you first learn that love had to be earned? The question hit me like a wave. I didn't answer right away. I didn't need to. That became the start of something else, not a recovery exactly, but a remembering. Of who I was before I learned to barter love with helpfulness. Before I equated sacrifice with safety. Rachel gave me language I'd never had before: enmeshment, triangulation, parentification, narcissistic wounding. She helped me see that my mother's need for control wasn't about love, it was about ownership. That I'd been cast in a role that benefited her but buried me. We talked about the golden child scapegoat dynamic. How Emily had been idealized while I was tasked with carrying the weight. How my efforts were always interpreted as attempts to dominate rather than connect. "You are not responsible for their brokenness," Rachel said once. "But you are responsible for protecting your peace now." That sentence stayed with me. As did another: "You can still love someone from a distance." I wasn't ready to think about reconciliation. I didn't know what I wanted from Emily, or if I even had anything left to give her. But I was beginning to understand something far more important: I didn't need their permission to take my power back. I just needed the courage to stop waiting for them to give it. The call came late on a rainy Tuesday, just as I was packing up to leave Rachel's office. Therapy had left me raw, but a different kind of raw, like the sting of fresh air in lungs, long deprived of oxygen. My phone buzzed. I glanced down. Leo. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering. I hadn't spoken to him since the night I was erased. He hadn't called then. Neither had Emily. The silence had been deafening. But something in me whispered, "Answer." "Hello." My voice cracked slightly. "Claire." Thank God. There was urgency in his tone and guilt. So much guilt. "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but please don't hang up." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "It's about Emily. And your mother." My chest tightened. "She found the texts," he said. "Or rather what she thought were texts from you." "They weren't." I went still. "What do you mean they were fake, Claire?" "Your mother created them. She changed your contact name on Emily's phone and rerouted texts through a third-party app. For months Emily thought she was talking to you, but she wasn't." The floor beneath me seemed to tilt. "She showed me the conversations," he continued. "They were cold, dismissive, terse. Nothing like you." I started digging. We compared timestamps, we checked IP addresses, and when we finally confronted Diane, she admitted it. I sat down slowly on the nearest bench outside the office. Rain tapped steadily on the awning above me. She admitted everything. That she forged messages. That she told vendors you canceled. That she deleted real texts from you before Emily could see them. Claire, she isolated you by design. I couldn't speak. She said she was protecting Emily's peace. That you were too dominant, too emotional. But it wasn't about peace. It was about control. She painted you as jealous, vindictive, unstable. I blinked against the sting in my eyes. "And Emily, she's devastated," Leo said. "She wanted to call you the moment she found out, but she wasn't sure you'd even pick up. She's afraid she lost you for good." I swallowed hard. "She might have," I said softly, "or at least the version of me who would have forgiven this easily." There was a long pause. "She's ready to make it right," he said. "And there's something else. Your Aunt Catherine, she's organizing a meeting. A family one. Small. Just people who need to hear the truth." I said nothing. "She thought you should be the one to speak. To show them what really happened." My pulse ticked faster. "When Thursday night? At her place, Emily and I will be there. Your dad too." I exhaled. "I'll think about it." He didn't push. That night I opened a folder I hadn't touched since the wedding unraveling began. Inside were all the receipts, emails, screenshots, the paper trail of my invisible labor. I printed them out carefully, arranging them into a binder. I added something else too: a copy of the real text messages I'd sent Emily, the ones Diane had intercepted or erased. I printed them alongside the forged ones Emily had been shown. Side by side, the truth was undeniable. 2 nights later, I stepped into my Aunt Catherine's living room and was met with a hush that was almost reverent. Emily stood by the window, pale and nervous. Her eyes met mine, and in them I saw remorse. Real, aching, wordless remorse. Leo gave me a small nod from the couch. My dad was already seated, his face drawn and anxious. Aunt Catherine greeted me with a firm embrace. "You're not alone anymore, sweetheart," she whispered. I sat down, opened the binder, and began. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth. I showed the texts real and fake. The mismatched timelines. The emails from vendors Diane had contacted pretending to be me. The receipts from the cancelled honeymoon Diane told everyone I had offered as manipulation. Then I paused and looked around the room. Emily and I have had a lifetime of love, I said quietly. But the wedge between us wasn't hers. It was planted, watered, grown with lies. My voice trembled only slightly. I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? And the answer was nothing. I just stopped being useful. I stopped playing along. And for our mother, that was enough. Emily broke down crying. Claire, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I didn't know how deep it went. I nodded, my heart torn. I know. But you didn't ask. And that hurt just as much. Then, to everyone's surprise, my father stood. He was shaking but steady. I've been silent a long time, he said. Too long. I let Diane's voice be the only one. I let her reshape reality because it was easier than confronting her. He looked at me, eyes filled with sorrow. I watched you carry the weight of this family since you were a child. I watched you take on responsibility that should have been mine. And when you were pushed out humiliated, I said nothing. His voice cracked. I'm so sorry, Claire. You didn't deserve this. Something inside me released. A knot I didn't know I'd carried for years loosened, unraveled, softened. Catherine spoke next. Diane did the same to me, she said. Years ago when I married into this family. She twisted words, isolated me, made me feel like the outsider. This isn't new. But it ends here. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting. Just stillness. Truth hanging heavy in the air. And then a decision. I won't force Diane to face this, I said. That's her journey, not mine. But I'm done pretending it didn't happen, and I'm done shrinking to keep the peace. The meeting ended not with resolution, but with clarity. When I left that night, Emily followed me to the door. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said. But I want to earn it. However long it takes. I looked at her. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. Start by listening, I said. Not to Mom. To me. She nodded, tears streaming. And I walked into the night knowing one thing: lies can silence you for a while. But the truth. It always finds a way. Rebuilding a bridge doesn't start with laying bricks. It starts with looking at the wreckage together in silence and deciding it's still worth crossing. That's how it began with Emily. The morning after the family meeting, she showed up at my apartment with a paper bag of pastries from the bakery we used to frequent in high school and a bouquet of wildflowers wrapped in brown paper. No cameras. No grand speech. Just her and trembling hands holding out something soft, something earnest. I know it's not enough, she said as I opened the door, but I wanted to come in person. I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. We sat on the floor with coffee and croissants, surrounded by the quiet echo of years of silence that had formed between us. And then slowly we began to talk, not just about what had happened, but about how we'd let it happen. I didn't ask enough questions, she admitted, eyes downcast. Mom made it easy not to. Every time something felt off, she had an explanation ready. And I wanted the wedding to be smooth so badly, I chose not to look too closely. You wanted to protect your peace, I said, repeating the phrase she'd once used to explain why I wasn't invited. She winced. But I hurt you in the process, and I'll regret that for a long time. I didn't rush to forgive her. That came later, in small ways. In Sunday brunches reinstated. In old inside jokes resurfacing. In emails sent with no agenda, just affection. Trust is a slow bloom. But we watered it together. The wedding was now 3 weeks away, and the atmosphere shifted palpably. Mom's role reduced drastically. Emily and Leo set clear conditions: no contact with vendors, no planning authority, no independent decision-making. She would attend, but only as the mother of the bride, not the executive producer she'd cast herself as. She did not take it gracefully. She called it punishment. Said she was being ostracized in her own family. For a while, she even threatened to boycott the ceremony. But when no one chased her or soothed her with reassurance, something changed. Not in her perhaps, but in us. We stopped reacting. And that's when her fury began to shrink. Eventually she agreed to attend, and she would behave. That was the unspoken agreement. Not because we demanded it, but because for once we didn't need her to approve in order to move forward. I resumed my role as maid of honor, but on new terms. I wasn't there to prove myself. I wasn't there to please. I was there to support my sister with boundaries, with honesty, and with my whole heart intact. I helped finalize seating charts, mediated a few final wardrobe crises, and even coordinated a low-key bachelorette dinner with Emily's closest college friends. It wasn't about making up for lost time, it was about starting again, this time with clarity. 1 week before the wedding, I handed Emily a small square envelope tied with soft blue ribbon. "This isn't Bali," I said. "No luxury resort, no sunset cruise." She opened it gently, eyes scanning the itinerary. "A mountain cabin in Vermont," she read aloud. "A tiny town with no cell service, no itinerary, just trees, hiking, and the world's coziest fireplace." "It's quiet," I said. "And real. And doesn't cost me a month's rent." She laughed, then looked up with tears in her eyes. "It's perfect." I smiled. This gift isn't about proving anything. It's not a way to buy forgiveness or a seat at the table. It's just a gift. Freely given. She nodded. "That means more than I can say." And it did. Because this time I gave from a place of fullness, not desperation. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, like the universe itself had decided to offer a truce. The Clayton Hotel gleamed under the late spring sun, and guests began arriving in a flurry of navy suits and pastel dresses. I stood beside Emily as she got ready, helping her into a sleek, understated gown that suited her in a way no over-embellished dress ever could. Her hair was simple, her smile genuine. "You okay?" I asked, handing her the bouquet. She met my eyes in the mirror. "I am now." The ceremony was beautiful, simple, heartfelt, and free of drama. Mom sat quietly in the front row, dressed immaculately, her expression unreadable. But she didn't interrupt, didn't overstep. And that for once was enough. As Emily and Leo exchanged vows, I felt something strange rise in my chest. Not pain, not regret. Gratitude. Because somehow, against all odds, we'd made it here. Not unscathed, but stronger. At the reception, as guests danced and champagne flowed, I found a quiet corner near the gift table. Emily approached, cheeks flushed from laughter and wine. "I know I still have a lot of work to do," she said, "but I'm glad you're here." "So am I." Then she added softly, "I'm also proud of you. For setting boundaries. For not disappearing." "I almost did," I admitted. "But you didn't," she said. "You stayed. Just not on their terms." And that, more than any speech or toast or grand gesture, felt like the true beginning of something new. A sisterhood not built on obligation or performance, but on truth, hard-won and shared. The wedding day unfolded like a well-rehearsed play that somehow still held moments of genuine magic. There was no drama. No last-minute chaos. No family implosion waiting in the wings. Just golden sunlight flooding the ceremony hall, the soft rustle of dresses and florals, and the hush of 100 hearts waiting to witness something sacred. In the bridal suite, I helped Emily into her gown. The same hands that had once laced up her childhood sneakers now adjusted satin and lace. She looked like herself, but softer. Braver. "I still can't believe we're here," she whispered, blinking back tears. I said, smoothing a strand of hair from her face. "You fought for it." She turned, catching my eyes in the mirror. We both did. The hug we shared in that moment wasn't just for today, it was for all the days we'd lost and the ones we were reclaiming. Outside guests took their seats under a canopy of wisteria. The air was thick with spring and possibility. Diane sat in the front row, her back perfectly straight, her hands folded in her lap like a woman clinging to the last threads of control. Her expression was neutral, almost blank, but not unfeeling. Beneath it, something flickered: restraint, maybe. Or uncertainty. Since the family meeting, she'd remained distant but civil. Dad, to his credit, had insisted she begin therapy or lose what little support she still had. Surprisingly, she agreed. Whether it was genuine or tactical remained to be seen. 2 weeks prior, she'd approached me in the driveway of my father's house after a Sunday brunch. Not with an apology, but with a sentence that surprised me. "You've always seen people more clearly than I do." It wasn't much, but it was honest, and for her perhaps it was the closest thing to confession. I didn't respond with forgiveness. I wasn't ready. But I didn't walk away either. Instead I said, "That's something therapy might help with." And left it there. Healing, I was learning, didn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it came in the form of space, of silence that didn't wound, of seeing each other clearly even from a distance. As the ceremony began, I stood by Emily's side, bouquet in hand, heart steady. Leo's vows were tender. Emily's voice shook but never faltered. And when they were pronounced husband and wife, the applause felt less like celebration and more like a collective exhale. Like maybe, just maybe, this was the new story now. The reception was a warm blur of clinking glasses and laughter. I moved through the crowd with ease, not performing, not fixing, not carrying. Just being. And then, as scheduled, it was time for my toast. The MC tapped the microphone. "We now invite the maid of honor, Claire Bennett, to say a few words." I stood, paper in hand, but didn't read from it. Instead, I looked around at faces I'd known since childhood. Some had once believed things about me that weren't true. Others had quietly defended me. All of them in some way had been touched by the same web of stories and silence. I could stand here and tell you stories about Emily. I began about childhood mishaps, whispered secrets in the dark, or the way she once insisted her goldfish needed a bedtime story. Laughter rippled through the crowd. But instead I continued, "I want to talk about something else, about what it means to love someone unconditionally but with boundaries. What it means to choose to keep your heart open even when it's been bruised. And what it means to show up not because you're trying to earn your place, but because you've finally remembered it was always yours to begin with." I paused, feeling the weight of silence settle in the room. Love isn't perfect. Families definitely aren't perfect. But healing. Healing is possible when we stop confusing peace with avoidance. When we stop calling silence love. And when we realize that the deepest love we can offer someone else is the love we first learned to offer ourselves. I looked at Emily then. Her eyes shimmered, her smile steady. "You're my sister," I said simply. "And I am proud to stand beside you, not just because I always have, but because now I choose to. Fully. Freely." A quiet tear rolled down her cheek as applause filled the hall, not thunderous but real. Afterward, Mom approached me near the dessert table. Her lips were pursed, her hands still twitchy with years of habit. "That was a thoughtful speech," she said. I nodded. "I've started therapy," she added, not meeting my eyes. "With the one Catherine recommended." "That's good," I said. And I meant it. She shifted, uncomfortable. "I suppose. It will take time." "It will," I said. "And that's okay." We stood there for a beat, two women who had once tried to mold each other into something bearable, now just trying to see each other as they were. I didn't hug her. She didn't apologize. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a war. That night, after the music ended and the guests had begun to drift away, I found myself outside alone beneath a string of garden lights. Leo joined me with 2 flutes of champagne. "She's lucky to have you," he said, handing me one. I shook my head. "We're lucky to have each other again." Then, in the quiet that followed, I realized something. This story, the one I thought had been written for me by others, was mine again. Not because it had a perfect ending, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for one. I didn't get justice in the way I imagined. I didn't get revenge. I got something better. Clarity. Boundaries. My voice. And a different kind of mother. Not the one who birthed me, but the one I was learning to be for myself. The kind that says you are loved, you are enough, and you don't have to earn it. 6 months later, I stood on the edge of a cliff in Big Sur, sunlight brushing over the ocean below like a warm whisper. The wind tangled my hair. Tyler slipped a simple gold ring onto my finger, and for once there was no audience, just us, the waves, and a promise. "I want this," I told him, "but only if it's ours. No committees, no manipulation, no drama." He smiled. "Then that's exactly what it'll be." No grand speeches, no elaborate choreography. Just truth, tenderness, and the quiet relief of feeling seen without needing to be spectacular. For the first time in my adult life, I was planning something for me not out of obligation, not to prove anything, not to hold a family together. Just because I wanted it. And that, I realized, was freedom. Back home things had begun to shift. Slowly. Imperfectly. But undeniably. My parents, Emily, and I had started attending group therapy just once a month at first. At the beginning, the sessions were mostly tense silence, awkward nods, and long, fragile pauses. But over time, the silence softened. The pauses became thoughtful. Even Diane, still learning how to be a different kind of mother, began offering stories instead of control, vulnerability instead of judgment. She hadn't transformed, but she'd begun to try. And sometimes that was enough. Dad found his voice. Emily found her spine. And I found peace not in fixing things, but in letting go of the need to. One chilly October afternoon, Emily called me, voice thick with joy. "She's here," she whispered. Claire rose. 6 pounds 10 ounces. She has your eyes. My knees gave out a little on the kitchen floor as I cried into my hands. Not because I needed the honor, but because I hadn't asked for it. Her middle name, Claire, wasn't an apology, it was love. A kind that didn't need permission or perfection. Just presence. I visited the hospital that evening holding the tiny girl who blinked up at me with a gaze both brand new and deeply familiar. "You're already so loved," I whispered, brushing a finger along her cheek. "And you don't have to earn a single bit of it." Emily leaned her head against my shoulder. "That's the kind of legacy I want to pass on," she said quietly. "The kind you gave me even when I forgot it." Some days, I still felt the echo of old patterns tug at me, when someone didn't respond fast enough to a text, when silence crept into a conversation, when I felt that impulse to do more, prove more, be more. But now I knew better. I could pause. I could choose. Because I wasn't living in reaction anymore. I was living in alignment. I'd stopped performing for affection. I'd stopped apologizing for having needs. And I'd started building a life not around being indispensable to others, but being deeply rooted in myself. It didn't make me invulnerable, it made me honest. One morning, sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea and a notebook, I wrote a sentence that I later taped to my fridge. "My value doesn't depend on whether others recognize it. It has always been there, and now I live like I believe it." Some nights I still lit a candle for the girl I used to be. The one who worked herself to exhaustion for love. Who tolerated emotional starvation in the name of family. Who thought if she was just good enough she'd finally be safe. I didn't shame her, I thanked her. Because she got me here. And now it was my turn to live for us both. So if you've made it to the end of this story, maybe you've felt some of this too. Maybe you've been the one quietly holding the center while everyone else spun wildly. Maybe you've been erased, misunderstood, or expected to be the glue while cracking on the inside. Or maybe you're just now realizing you don't have to keep playing a role that was never yours to begin with. If so, let me tell you what someone once told me. You are not hard to love. You are just learning to love yourself loudly enough that silence from others doesn't sound like the truth. Your story isn't over. It's just turning a page. And who knows? Maybe next time the story won't be about who you are to everyone else. Maybe it will be about who you've finally become for you. I'll be here cheering for you. Because healing isn't always a grand finale. Sometimes it's just waking up, smiling at your reflection, and whispering, "I am enough. I have always been enough."